There's two more people that could be coming, but we are at quorum technically. So if we want to check to see if we are live streaming.
It appears the live stream is going right now. You're all set.
And that's so loud. Facebook and YouTube, right?
I see YouTube and I will check Facebook now.
Okay, cool. And YouTube, right? Yep. Just heard myself. Okay. All right, then I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as written.
Do I hear a second?
I will second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the agenda has passed. And then we have the meeting minutes from April, and I would entertain a motion for that.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Do I hear a second?
I will second that as well.
Okay, any discussion? Then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right, unanimous. And let's also do roll call, so everyone just go in order and say your name.
Dave DeBack.
Tressa Greshak.
David Benak.
Sharon Deaver.
Sorry, David Benak.
Rachel Yondel.
Thomas Dewhurst.
And since Justin isn't here, we don't have a city update this month. And then I guess, were there any communications from the email that we needed to discuss? I think we just followed up with the last one. So we're all set there. Anyone with any individual announcements, news, or educational things?
You know what, let me, just for anyone who's following last week, the determination of the grant that was brought up is that I think it's more of a community-based resource than it is a grant, but we're always open to additional grants, so I think that's really the update.
Thank you.
Anybody looking for something to take part in, the Children's Nature Playscape is doing a volunteer workday over at their site on the 17th of this month, so in a couple days. They're planting some different kinds of trees and vegetables and just cleaning the site up.
There's also, it's bike month, so the city is doing some things. There was a bike show last Saturday, and there's also an app, Love to Ride, that the city's asking people to download so that it can track where people are generally biking to figure out where it makes sense for infrastructure. So I believe that starts in a couple days. I thought it started, but I'm pretty sure it didn't actually start yet. So yeah, it's a pretty cool data source there.
Is that the name of the app, Data Source?
No, it's called Love to Ride is the app.
Love to Ride. Okay.
Anything else? Okay.
There is a native plant sale this weekend. It's not actually in Kalamazoo, it's in Rockford, but I can give the details for that. It is, I believe, from 10 to 2. So trees, forbs, shrubs, like all native plantings, and the address is 9065 Myers Lake Avenue in Rockford, Michigan, if anyone is interested in some native plants.
Sweet. If there's nothing else, then we can check for public comments on the phones, or also if anyone here wanted to speak, we can do a public comment now, and we'll also do it at the end. We have you, if you're our guest, we have you under new business, which is pretty much quick after this. All right, no one on the phones, and then anyone else in the audience that wants to have a comment? Okay. None right now, but again, we'll do that at the end as well. Moving on to new business, we do have a guest here from Urban Ashes. So if you want to do the intro.
Yes, I would love to do the intro. As you know, I'm new to the tree committee, and I've been trying to educate myself on all matter of plantings and harvesting, and thought that the concept of tying this into the carbon footprint of the city of Kalamazoo is a priority. Obviously, that's one of the things Justin is doing. Trees are a huge, what would you say, tree sink for carbon, sequestration. And the trend is that many cities are looking at trees as a valuable asset for keeping that carbon sequestered. So my path led me to the city of Ann Arbor, and I talked to their urban forestry person. Then they have a brand new program where they are trying to harvest storm damaged trees and get those to be reused. And that involves, Paul can talk to us about that in much more detail. And their forester introduced me to Paul Hickman, the founder and CEO of Urban Ashes. He's also, I think, one of the founders of the Urban Wood Network, which is a huge, well, I shouldn't say huge, it's a network across the United States that involves municipalities, arborists, sawmills, suppliers, manufacturers, and Paul is one of the movers and shakers in that network as well. So Paul graciously agreed to come and talk to us and kind of tell us what his company does and how they got going. So Paul, thank you for being here.
It was working before. There we go. How's that? Can everybody hear me now? Oop. That's better. Okay. And I moved it. It didn't like. Apologies. Oh. We okay? Okay. A little bit of background on myself. Thomas gave a good introduction. You're hired. You can run ahead of me. Going all the way back to like 2002, 2003 here in Southeast Michigan. Those who have been around this area since then are probably aware of the Emerald Ash Borer. When that was identified in Canton, just east of Ann Arbor, it was the introduction of the EAB, or the Emerald Ash Borer. The destruction that ensued from that was pretty daunting, and a group of us got together in 2003 to 2005 or so, put together a network of mills to try to utilize those trees when they came down beyond chipping them. And they weren't just chipping them like normal chips, they were actually doing them even smaller to make sure that it killed the beetles, so it really rendered them almost useless even as chips. So we were looking at opportunities of what we could do with this wood, and discovered that it actually doesn't, the Emerald Ash Borer doesn't damage the wood, and if it's processed correctly through a USDA approved kiln, it will make sure that it kills the Emerald Ash Borer, and you can utilize the wood as you can transport across state lines anywhere as long as that's gone through that process. So that was sort of the initial introduction to urban wood utilization here in Southeast Michigan. And that was the Urban Wood Project, and there were several, and there still are several urban wood marketplaces around Southeast Michigan, all the way up to Flint, and I think Hazlitt has one, and Adrian, Ann Arbor did, but unfortunately the COVID sort of took its toll on that from actually the parent organization that we were located in. But since then, is actually launched in 2009 as a manufacturer of picture frames and furniture, all out of urban salvage wood, and we grew to sell to about 250 locations in 43 states over the next 10 years. But then decided, and a big part of that was always focused on a labor force that is our returning citizens, folks that have been formerly incarcerated, or a youth that had contact with the justice system. But in 2019 or so, we decided to shift our focus from being a relative, even though we were selling to those main locations around the country, looking at how can we have a much larger impact. We were selling toothpicks basically as picture frames. And there's roughly, and you'll see here more details, there's roughly 46 million metric tons of furniture grade lumber every year that comes down, and I'll describe what urban wood is, but that comes down every year that's chipped or burned that we waste across America, mainly because we do not have the infrastructure or even the knowledge of the volume and what's happening. So that's really what I'm going to kind of touch on here, is sort of explain the volume that's there and the potential that's here for the city, whether it's Kalamazoo. And we have a gentleman from Portage who is fitting, because obviously what just happened last week in Portage. And the idea is to have infrastructure in place like this before, so you can, when things like this happen, we can address them. So our model is, we call it our circular urban wood trichotomy. And what that is pretty straightforward. It is it's a business framework for municipalities and local businesses that emphasizes sort of the triple bottom line business model. So it's a circular economy around urban wood utilization. But it's basically a municipal log recovery program. And Thomas used a word and I don't mean to correct you, but it's a dangerous word to use, saying harvesting, because it has a connotation that we're going to come in and harvest the city trees, and that's not what we're doing. Salvaging, recovering them, we're not taking trees down that are, the mantra is trees first, wood next. So be careful, and I know you had absolutely 100% good intentions, but be careful with that word, because people, rightfully so, are concerned about us coming in and taking down good trees just for their lumber. And so that leads me to what our circular wood economy focuses on in that triple bottom line is the social equity, environmental sustainability, and economic diversity. We bring that to the community, and it's all revolving around the utilization of the wood. So what is urban wood? The simple definition of urban wood is any wood that came from any tree that came down for any reason other than its wood value. Storm damage, blight-stricken, emerald ash borer, kill trees, even orchard trees that age out, that are no longer producing, that they're taking out to replant new trees for new fruit. New construction is another one that's a little lower on there, and we really try to encourage, obviously, leave as many trees as possible. You were talking about the water mains, where all the sycamores came down, and ideally we want to keep as many of those as possible. But some of those, if they do have to come down, what do we do with them? And so this provides opportunities beyond firewood and mulch. So I'm going to focus on Ann Arbor here, as far as what works, what we've established in Ann Arbor, some of the work we've done in Ann Arbor. This may be a little small on your screen up here, but Ann Arbor is obviously a little bit bigger than Kalamazoo, but put Kalamazoo and Portage together, they're about the same. So this is not, and obviously proximity, you got a very similar climate and everything. So Ann Arbor plants about 1,000 trees a year. They lose 600 trees a year on average, and so they feel like they're doing relatively well as far as planting. But what we discovered in doing a baseline life cycle assessment, that out of those trees that, well, I'm going to get into that in a minute, but out of those trees, those 600 trees that they lose, about 150 of them every year are 23 inches or greater, and the city doesn't have the capacity to chip those. They chip everything underneath that. The ones over 23 inches, they stockpile in a big biomass pile, and they bring in an outside contractor every 3 to 5 years to the tune of $25,000 to, I think, $35,000 a year to grind that up and make it go away. It's literally make it go away. They can't tell me even where it goes. They don't ask. And that's not an anomaly. That's pretty common practice in most cities. So you'll see that 450 of those are getting chipped up immediately, and 150 make it to the biomass pile, sit there and start decaying there, but then they're also chipped and go to another location. So at their existing process or their business as usual, you're looking at 100% underutilized, or they're losing roughly 1,100 metric tons of carbon. So wood, you talked about the carbon in wood. Dried wood, kiln-dried wood is 50% on average, 50% carbon by weight. So if I'm holding a 10-pound block of dried wood, 5 pounds of that is carbon. So there's quite a bit of carbon in wood. We're not talking when the tree's wet because the water doesn't have any of the carbon in there. It's all, once it's been dried, it's in the solid, the solid portions of the tree. And that equals roughly 4,000 metric tons of CO2 that's emitted from the decay of those trees. If it's burned, it's released right away. If it's chipped, it'll start to decay and release most of that back. Some of that does go into the ground, but some of that goes, majority of it goes back into the atmosphere within 2 to 7 years. And most people have chips and know how long they last, and so those decay. So looking at, them thinking about their 1,000 trees that they're doing relatively well, our data showed them that they need to plant 18,000 trees a year and grow them for 10 years to make up for just the year one of loss. You're doing big trees that are coming down and you're planting little trees, and it takes that to catch up. It's really sensitive. Is that better? Okay. I'll try not to touch even the podium. I'm not touching the mic. So obviously they weren't doing as well as they thought. And the idea is, okay, how do we recover some of this carbon, or not keep it sequestered, because it's already sequestered. How do we keep it sequestered, and how do we keep it from releasing the CO2 emissions? And this is what's available, what we're able to determine and estimate with Ann Arbor. There's roughly 50,000 board feet for those who know, I know Thomas knows wood, but a board foot is 1 inch thick, 12 inches by 12 inches. It's a standard dimension in lumber. Pretty substantial volume of lumber. That equals roughly 37 metric tons of carbon that would continue to be sequestered, and 134 metric tons of CO2 that's not released. And that ultimately equates to, if we only capture half of that, that's the equivalent of planting another 1,100, if you're talking just the carbon and CO2 aspect of it, not all the other benefits that trees have, like shade and all those things. If you're talking just purely carbon and CO2, it's the equivalent of planting another 1,100 trees or so. So they're basically doubling their carbon impact than what they had before. And that's only capturing 50%, and that's just purely on the carbon side. So how do we do this? We introduce what we call our circular urban wood trichotomy, or a cut model. So Urban Ashes is simply a company that designs, develops, implements, and then manages a log recovery yard and connects with local mills and manufacturers to make sure that this wood gets to them. And so the way we basically just become the facilitator and the connector between the municipality and all the other local businesses. We're not the ones that process the wood. We just make sure that we set up the system and that wood gets out to the local mills and the local manufacturers to utilize it as lumber and other higher use entities. So by implementing that, you could see in Ann Arbor's potential, where they were at 100% of underutilized, you can get it all the way between 64 and 89% kept in the system if when implement the cut model, and after a few years of getting it more established and developing more manufacturers in the area using it, you can cut that down, cut their losses down quite a bit. Overall benefits, just going across on economic opportunities, we're looking at this is a big one for the municipality, decreased disposal costs. In the case of Ann Arbor, it'll cut down on that $25,000 to $45,000. I don't know what Kalamazoo is situation yet, and that's one of the first things we'd look into is see what are they paying for disposal right now. But it cuts down on that, and definitely creates more jobs. It takes seconds literally to chip a tree. And it can take, we're employing multiple people at a mill or manufacturing, where those chips would have been just one person, pushing the tree into the chipper is pretty quick. So many more business opportunities locally, getting into waste reduction. Obviously, we talked about the carbon sequestration, and a big thing that we do, we track all the logs with a QR code. And that actually goes through the whole system, through the milling and everything, so we can report back to the city how much carbon has been continued to be sequestered and how much is CO2 has not been released. So if you do have sustainability goals or carbon goals for the city, these can get added back into that, and we can provide the report for that. Obviously, increasing local resources of those, and I'm picking on Thomas again here because he told me he was a woodworker. So during COVID, good example, wood was very difficult to access and prices went through the roof. It did not change prices for urban wood at all. So the urban wood mills prices did not change because it wasn't impacted by the international supply chain that wood is typically involved in. So it really helps offset that with local resources. It's obviously not going to replace it whatsoever. Even if we captured all that 46 million metric tons, it's only about 10% of the entire hardwood industry in the U.S. So it's not going to replace it, but it's definitely can support it. Looking at community engagement, there's great stories behind it. Just to be able to say, yeah, that wood came from Kalamazoo, or it came from town here. I got to use it. So there's definitely a connection and pride. It increases community resilience. As far again, is that we can utilize this wood back into the community, and increases bring up quality of life, because this is coming on the labor side, working with the folks that we really encourage all these businesses to adopt labor practices that are similar to what we had as a manufacturer in hiring returning citizens and youth to have contact with the justice system. And that greatly increases their quality of life and ultimately the community's quality of life, safety, all of those things. And then ultimately, it's wood. It's very similar to traditional wood, but it's got its unique characteristics in it. Every piece is a little different, like any wood, but this is even more unique. So it can tell a unique story. And a lot of trees have cultural significance, whether it was from what I understand, there were some really major trees out in the park here in front that came down recently or in the last few years. Oh, in the 80s, okay. But they're historic trees like that have cultural significance, and how do we sort of maintain that and utilize that going on? So the value prospect on the environmental side, and I'll try to go quickly here because I know you guys have some other things to do, but looking at this is the current baseline on the far left here. There's really no environmental benefit with chipping everything. It's pretty nominal. Chips are good and definitely for keeping moisture and stuff in the ground, but we have astronomically more than we need. You can take the whole upper part of the tree still. We're talking about the bottom 1 or 2 logs. And so once you introduce the new model, the environmental impact comes down. You will see new emissions when you do any kind of manufacturing, even if it's hand done. You're going to generate some new emissions here through the processing, but you get to realize the value of the carbon and the CO2, the lack of CO2 emissions from the wood in the sequestered carbon once you have the finished good. And it definitely outweighs. There's life cycle studies out there that show that urban wood is carbon negative unless you get into some crazy processing. But traditional wood processing, if this, let's say all this wood up here that it makes up the dais here, if that were all urban wood, it would have been carbon negative even when it was put in. Going through all the processing, there's still more carbon in this than what was emitted. So ultimately you end up with a much better situation environmentally. Then looking at it on the economic side, there's the value. If a city is selling their chips, it's usually really very nominally. Most of them give them away to the local citizens, so it's not an economic benefit to the city, but it's obviously a really nice service to the community. And this doesn't impact that. That's still, you can still have those chips. And then you start, as you get into processing, again, you're obviously looking at more jobs and through processing and manufacturing and through the finished goods. So you see a much greater local economic benefit than just chipping. General costs, most cities will ask right away, it's like, what is it going to cost us to do this? Cities, it's really time. There's really no out-of-pocket expenses for the city. It's mainly time and getting it developed and getting everybody on board that needs to be on board. Some training. It depends on, without knowing exactly what Kalamazoo is doing with their tree removals, I can't quite say, but changing process a little bit, but for the most part, it's very similar to any other tree removal. There's a couple minor changes. Entering some data, most cities are tracking their trees all the way up to the point they come down, and then they stop tracking. We actually basically attach a software after that through an API so we can then track the tree afterwards. And so they would enter the data into that, but it's very simple, only 5 points of data. It's not hard to do. Potential land use, this is probably one of the bigger hurdles to get over or to address is where do we put these logs in the meantime while they're being staged before they go to a mill. So potential land use from the city, or if it has to be on private property, that's one thing we have to look at. We provide what we call our city matrix, and as part of that, one of the very first things we do is do an extensive interview with the city, typically the city forester, sometimes public works, to find out what's their business as usual to get a good understanding. And then we give them access to all the other cities that we have worked with and are currently working with, and all the other cities that actually have, there's about 5 major cities in the country that have pretty long-standing, really good track record with utilization. Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Baltimore, Fort Collins, and Edina, Minnesota. They all have pretty long standing, and we've got all the data on that to show what they've done, and they're all different. It all depends on, it's kind of unique to each city. And so you can kind of see in this graph here, it becomes available on our website, all the data that goes in, and it shows what your current situation is, but also what your potentials are. As you kind of get closer to it, you can see that, okay, now we're at 30% of our capacity or our potential, and we provide all that as part of our service. The process looks like, as I said, we do a business as usual life cycle assessment. That then we check in with, you find out who's in the area, who are the local mills, who are the local manufacturers, and start making those connections. We identify and bridge the gaps in existing businesses. So if you have an existing business in the area that is already utilizing their wood business, but they don't utilize urban wood, we introduce urban wood to them and explain to them and sort of educate them on that and get them on board with using urban wood is kind of example with that. And then potentially provide business plans and business opportunities where you find gaps. Ann Arbor is a good example. There isn't a large enough mill, and to my knowledge, there's not one in Kalamazoo general immediate area that's large enough to handle all the trees here. So there'd be, to look at adding an additional mill, and we can help make that happen too and provide that expertise. And then this is more the support services, make the connections on the labor side. Who are the support services for wraparound services for the folks that are formerly incarcerated. We can help connect with that. And then design and implement short-term and long-term sustainable workforce support as part of that. And then as far as implementation, we establish and manage a concession-style log recovery yard. So if it's on city property, once those logs, it's very similar to this, and I should have looked this up, but does Kalamazoo have a recycling program for plastic, metal, and glass? Who operates it? It's privately operated. Okay, so it'd be a very similar situation. I don't know what the contract is there, but most recycling agreements are similar, and this is a similar situation. So once that tree comes down, and if it's going to go to let's say it's a municipal log yard that they already have a place where they're taking some logs, and we now do a separate pile. That separate pile is owned and managed by Urban Ashes, and when those sell to the mills, the city gets a percentage of those sales back. So the city does see some sales income from the sales of those logs, and Urban Ashes gets the remaining portion of that, and we work out whatever that contract is. So we manage that yard, and we're responsible for the logs then. Then ultimately adopt the model and practices at the local wood processing and stakeholder businesses, and then implement the workforce development practices with all the different companies and help them with that. And then this kind of gives you the big picture we talked about, sort of the volume in the U.S. There's roughly 8 billion board feet available in the U.S. of furniture-grade lumber out of that 46 million metric tons. And it's estimated, I would say it's well over $1 billion industry as opposed to 750, but that's the data from the USDA. It says there's about a $750 million industry, 73 million, I think, in Michigan. So not insignificant numbers. And looking at roughly 23 million metric tons of CO2 not released and 6.4 million metric tons of carbon continue to be sequestered. And to put it into context, that's the equivalent, again, back on the carbon CO2 side, that's the equivalent of planting roughly 385 million trees a year and growing them for 10 years. That's assuming we capture all of that, which you obviously can't do, but it tells you how, roughly what's there. So in conclusion, kind of wrapping up, the environmental sustainability, social equity, and economic diversity are all very important things for us, and we try to hit on all three. Maximizing the urban trees, reducing waste, reduce disposal costs, preserving natural resources and mitigating carbon emissions, providing career and business opportunities for our formerly incarcerated and youth that have had contact with the justice system, and then increase community safety and enhanced overall quality of life based off of that. And then economic diversity, we're definitely, as I said, really promoting local businesses. That's a big part of our model, is to try to keep that wood locally here into local businesses. And so you're seeing more diversity, more support of the local businesses as opposed to big boxes and things like that. And thank you for your time, and thank you very much, Thomas. The QR code will take you to our website. If you scan that, that'll kind of tell you. But it's pretty easy to set up. It's not a very hard thing, and I'm happy to. I think, did you speak with Tiffany Jacobazzi? Okay. Some of you may know who Missy Stultz is, Missy was very involved in this too. So out of the A20 program, we're actually doing a open house as part of A20 week on June 9th. It's a Sunday, so if folks want to come over, we are doing a open house at the log yard. I don't know if that makes sense. Open yard at the log yard, and talking and more about this and showing examples of the wood and various things. So if you want to come over, for that, I definitely recommend that. And you'll have a bunch of people from the city to be able to talk to. How did you do this? What were the hurdles? How did you get over them? How did you convince city council, the mayor, whatever? June 9th. I believe it's from 12 to 2, but if you go to the A20, I think it's A20 week. If you do a search for that, you'll find it. And it is at the log recovery yard. If you know where Ann Arbor's drop-off station is by any chance, it's part of that. It's on Ellsworth and Platt, and it's in the back there by where the MRF is, or the recycling facility. It's right by that. So, but I encourage Kalamazoo to consider it. I'm happy to talk. It's pretty straightforward. It's really not that difficult to do. Once we get enough people on board and they can talk to some others that have done this and realize it's not that hard. We being Urban Ashes, really try to take the brunt of all the unknowns. And I've been doing this, me particularly, for 26 years. And I understand urban wood and the challenges and the unique characteristics that are out there. It is a chaotic supply chain, but if you understand it, know it, you can wrangle it, so to speak.
Yeah, we definitely have time for questions. Also, I have one.
Yeah.
I was curious if you have an idea of what the smaller end of cities that you've worked with versus bigger end, what that range is.
We haven't gone, we've done, I'm trying to think on what's the smallest we've gone so far, because you guys are at roughly, and population isn't always a good analogy because we're talking trees, not people. And I don't know what the volume of tree, what the tree canopy. Do you guys have a tree inventory?
We just had that completed a couple years
with
ago.
Davey. You have a tree plotter inventory. Okay. I forget what the volume is. You guys are definitely high enough, but I would recommend, even with Ann Arbor, what we'll typically do is we'll start with whatever city in that immediate area or county has the greatest capacity. And in that case, Ann Arbor definitely did, because they're the only one in Washtenaw County, including the county, that has a forester. And so we start with that and set up the base there, and then start opening it up to the other communities in the county. And it would make sense, I think, not even necessarily doing that, but start together with Portage and do them together. And whether you have a common yard that is on the edge, we're looking at that actually in Genesee County between Flint and Swartz Creek. Similar thing, that the shared yard may actually be in Swartz Creek because they actually have more open property than Flint does. So you're not below the line, by any means, for sure. It's very doable because it's really not hard to set up. It's not like a MRF where you have to have a lot of equipment. I don't know. We'd have to look and see what kind of equipment the city's using to remove trees, and whether or not they have the capacity to keep them 8 to 10 feet in length. That's a big challenge right there, potentially. I don't know if anybody, if that answered your question.
Out of curiosity, do any of these other cities actually do the milling themselves? Have they
Baltimore
bought into-
does. Baltimore's the only one of size that I know of that does. And in our studies, and you can actually look, and in our city matrix, a lot of the cities haven't collected, they haven't been tracking a lot of the data. So we're now they're, when we actually did these interviews, they're like, okay, we're going to start tracking this more. Baltimore, out of the big ones, out of those cities that I mentioned, is by far the most inefficient, by far. And if you talk to Sean Preston, who runs Camp Small, which is the location for Baltimore, he will tell you that they are incredibly inefficient. We again, Urban Ash is a strong proponent of getting this out to businesses in the local area. To me, this is, we'll get my personal opinion about government is government's job is really doing that, is to do everything it can to help the community, help the businesses, and help the citizens, and not necessarily go into business and compete against them, because that's ultimately what you would be doing if the city starts milling it themselves and running a business. And anybody who works in city, my wife works for state government, and to me, government and business don't go well together. It can be done, for sure.
I have a couple of questions, Paul. Where do arborists or tree trimmers fit into the...
That was step 3.
I don't want to use harvesting to...
In the recovery process.
Recovering logs because, take a big storm that comes through, the city is really responsible for the curb lawn trees. But on any given strong thunderstorm, there's going to be many, many trees that the private tree trimmers are doing.
Correct. So that's the third step, is in expanding the model in the area. First is to establish a single solid base, then open it up to other communities, and then from there open it up to private.
Okay.
Because once you get to private, now, in this county, there could be 100 tree services. And you have to vet those as to, who has the right insurance and who will consistently cut the trees properly. And so it becomes more of a challenge. So the idea is to start, I don't want to say start small, because we're actually starting with the biggest entity, but we're starting with 1 or 2 entities, maybe if it's Portage, and get that established and then start opening it up. But the intention is to open it up to anybody and everybody in the area that is responsible for tree removals.
Is it a challenge to recruit sawmills? How hard is it to recruit a sawmill or multiple sawmills to accept urban wood? And do they have the capacity to scan the logs for metal?
Good question, because it's one of the absolute first questions most people ask, but anybody in the urban wood industry will tell you, first of all, we're only talking about urban wood mills. We're not talking about traditional mills. Almost all traditional mills wouldn't touch urban wood with a 10-foot pole, for exactly what you said. Johnson, is it Johnson Brothers? Or Johnson, I forget what it is, the large mill in this general area, which is a big commercial mill. They scan their logs and they kick out anything that has metal in it, and then the urban mills come get it, or they'll buy it for pennies or cheaper on a discount. So back to your question, any urban mill, anybody that has gone into urban milling, if they haven't brought in a scanner from day one, they're not going to last very long. The scanners have gotten a whole lot better. The removal process has gotten a lot better. You do cut your losses occasionally when you run into some area where there's a whole ton of metal. Concrete's worse because you can't see it with a scanner. And for some crazy reason, people like to pour concrete in their trees as a bandage. And then the tree grows around it. I don't know if you saw this is one of my absolute favorite pictures. You talked about metal. That's what urban trees deal with. And that's a great, they can, whatever's in them, it'll grow around them and hide it. So the metal's really not that big of an issue. So the mills that we're talking about are happy to access wood, where the challenge has always been, just like it's difficult for the folks on the municipal side to understand, how do we get these logs to the mills? The mills, almost every urban mill, I can guarantee you, has gone to a nearby municipality or multiple and said, hey, can we work with you to get their logs? And the municipality says, hey, we don't know how to do that, or puts them through a whole ton of red tape, and they just throw their hands up and say, I'm going to get them elsewhere, and they give up. So that's why we come in the middle to make this as easy as possible. Auctions are another one that cities will try. I have yet to find one that has successfully done any kind of sales. Talked to the folks in Grand Rapids 2 years ago, just tried to do a major auction of logs. The problem is you're putting the mill on your schedule, and where they have to come in and you want it 100, you want to buy logs, you have to buy this batch no matter what's in it. And so our model actually identifies trees that the local mills do want. And that's going to go up and down. There's certain times where certain trees we just, even though it's a nice big tree, there's not a market for it. But part of our challenge on our side is to grow those markets. And so to help those mills have more markets, to utilize those, cottonwood is a big one. For those who know cottonwood, it is not a great wood as far as wood goes, and it's very hard to dry. But it's great for pallet wood because you actually don't have to dry it. You can do it as kiln, and there's a lot of mills, even right over in Potterville and several other mills, that's all they do is cut cottonwood for pallets because they don't kiln dry it, and it's perfect for that. It's relatively lightweight. It's strong enough to function as pallet wood. We're working really hard on going after Tree of Heaven. Tree of Heaven's actually pretty damn nice wood. Most people don't realize it, and it doesn't smell any. For those who know Tree of Heaven, it doesn't smell anymore after it's kiln dried. And most people are like, ooh, it stinks, and it's very invasive, obviously. But it's a pretty nice wood. It looks like a blonde ash or a really blonde oak. So under a finish, most people would think it's an oak. So our whole thing is about also developing markets to go after black locust, which is banned in the state of Michigan. But it's invasive. It's considered invasive by DNR, and they go after it, but it's one of the best hardwoods in North America. Any other questions?
Do you, by chance, Jamie, have any point of view from the city of what currently goes on? It's totally fair if you don't, but I just figured I'd try.
I have taken a bunch of notes, and I know Justin is watching. He's at a conference right now, but has been watching because he has been working very closely with public services. We do have a forester here at the city of Kalamazoo and a forestry department, if you will, or division, who maintains trees within our public right-of-way. I don't really want to speak to exactly how they maintain and do their work. I can't really speak to equipment or anything like that. The city of Kalamazoo, though, we do maintain a compost facility where we currently keep and process a lot of our materials, but I don't really know exactly the details of what gets chipped, what happens to larger wood, and how we process that. I know we have recently, there has been burning done in the past, and that has been a practice we've changed recently. I think there has been burning that's been done in the past, and that's been changed recently, so I don't know exactly what the new management plans are, but I'm sure there are certainly staff would be really open to this kind of conversation because I've had some conversations in the past with our public services staff who have asked the same sort of thing. Again, sometimes how do we use this many wood chips? What should we be doing with them? How can we get them out to neighborhoods? Hey, we drop off these piles. They don't get picked up. How do we make sure they're not a nuisance in the neighborhood?
Right.
There's all sorts of considerations. And so I can't really speak to exactly the process, but this is certainly a great spot
We can
for us
find
to
out
start.
real quickly.
Exactly. Yep.
I mean, that's what our whole intake interview's about. It takes half hour to 45 minutes, and we can get most. And if they don't have that information, they can often find it pretty quickly. And I just remembered this. You also have, I would argue, one of the biggest. I can't call her a grandmother of urban wood utilization because she's only, I don't know how old Jessica is. For those who know Jessica Simons, Jessica is very responsible for the Urban Wood Project and the creation of the Urban Wood Network, and a really good close friend. It was Jessica, myself, and 2 other folks that started the Urban Wood Project, and you got her here at the Nature Center. And so I'm sure Jessica would bring it, her energy as well as maybe the Nature Center's energy to help out in this as well. Yeah, she's a monster in this in a good way. I'm not going to let her out, even though she tried to get out a few years ago.
I missed, what's her last name, Paul?
Simons, Simons. I think she's the VP of Sustainability at, I forget the title, at the Kalamazoo Nature Center. I'm happy to introduce you to her, Thomas.
Yeah, I have her email as well. Would this be something to present to the tree committee as well, or just city staff in general?
I think so. I invited a couple of members of the tree committee to attend, but I didn't hear back from them. I invited them a couple weeks ago. I sent a email of introduction for Paul and Anthony Ladd, who's the chair of the tree committee, and to Brian, who's in the urban forestry. Brian works different shifts, so sometimes he's not available for daytime. I think it would be great to have that conversation with the tree committee, because they're obviously going to be the ones that would work with Paul and have an interview and say, well, here's what we do now, and hopefully, Paul could have a better understanding of what the status quo is, and then kind of figure out what it would cost to do it. Obviously, it's a commitment, and it would require staff time. Of that, I am sure.
Yeah, ideally, what we try to do is, if we can, whether you guys, I think you got some IRA funding for the tree side, and if there's something that can be peeled off for that, to help get this set up to cover your staff time, is one way, or going after some state grants. There are several state grants that we've tied into before with Eagle and with Urban Forestry Department to be able to just to help offset the cost for setup. And then the ongoing costs are covered by Urban Ashes at that point, with the exception of the log yard if it's on city property.
I just wanted to make one more comment that I did hear from Justin, that we do clearly have this presentation recorded now that we have the YouTube live stream. And so he was going to be sharing this video with some staff. I think both from the public services side of things, we can definitely think about tree committee as well, but then also in maybe some of our workforce development and shared prosperity teams. Yeah. So I think that he's certainly going to be thinking about how to pull a team together to try to get some of those conversations going, but would certainly welcome some of these other connections. Okay. And I like the suggestion about Jessica as well. So okay. It's good to know her connection.
And then as far as in the city here, is there a sustainability office, or are you all sort of functioning as that?
So that is the person I referenced, Justin Gish, who's usually sitting in this chair. Okay. He's our sustainability planner, and so I thought that's the ideal one to have. That's who you want to have. That's sort of his job, is convening all of those different folks to bring them together under this umbrella.
They're probably right underneath the mayor or city council, and that's usually kind of sitting at the top because they do work in so many different departments. So that's the perfect one to get involved.
I wanted to thank Paul for his willingness to, jump in a car that has now broken down. His all-electric vehicle is now
3-month-old all-electric vehicle
at Stadium Drive being fixed, and we hope he can get home tonight. If well, not, I guess we're visiting all the bars up and down, right?
Yeah, if you see my
or looking at trees.
What's that?
Or looking at trees.
Yeah, looking at trees.
Yeah.
No, we think it was a software issue, actually, not an electrical battery thing. So it could be any new car now with all the software and everything that's in them. So, any other questions? And I'm happy to, you can get my phone number, and the email was at the end there too, and my phone number. If you want to reach out to me and have any questions, please do. But I look forward to hearing back from you and moving forward. And definitely, you've got an immediate issue in Portage. And I definitely would like to follow up with you on that, because I hate to see, the tornado itself is horrendous, and then seeing all the the devastation and those resources then get destroyed afterwards is just salt on the wound to me. So, if we can repurpose it back in the community, lessens it a little bit. So, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We'll go on to unfinished business. Was there anything we wanted to add with the Kalamazoo River litter issues or discuss any further?
I talked with Doug at the Watershed Council. He and I helped the Edison Neighborhood Association with a Portage Creek cleanup last weekend, or I guess the weekend before. They're still working on pulling it together. They're still interested. So we talked about a few of the different ways to assess ordinances, but nothing in terms of putting a committee together yet.
Great. And I don't think I noticed, and Jamie, I don't know if you would have been on this email, but for the waste update we usually get, we got a great full update last month, but did you by chance get the snapshot? Okay, we'll follow up with that next month for sure. And then and then we're skipping the community sustainability plan update since Justin's not here. I don't know why MoShift keeps being on here. We don't need that on there. I don't see any specific unfinished things about it. If anyone had anything, let me know. But yeah, they were a part of the bike show that happened last Saturday, and they're still doing their thing, but I don't think there's necessarily monthly things to discuss. So we can move forward to reports. So NFP Review Board, Bobby is not here. Same for air and water quality. Do you have anything for wildlife and natural resource protection?
No, not really.
There's some baby peregrine falcons, but is Gail? Gail just left. So we can continue to follow those. Okay, and then Planning Commission?
No big updates for the Planning Commission. They're going to start working on Imagine Kalamazoo 2035 soon, so those conversations will be happening, but yeah, no updates.
Is there a timeline on that?
I believe they said they wanted to have a draft done by October 2026. So we've got some time.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, Asylum Lake Policy and Management Council, they did a scheduled burn, so that's pretty cool. Trying to think of anything else. Definitely still looking for the implementer of the management plan also at Asylum Lake. I feel like those are the main things there, yeah. And then Parks and Rec, Rob said he couldn't make it, but he also doesn't have an update for that. And how about Kalamazoo River Watershed Council? That might be what you
The
just
Watershed
said.
Council was really just the same thing I was saying about trash, and then I'll just jump to the task force. I'm on that. No meetings, no notice, nothing happening as far as I know.
Then that is everything on a regular agenda, except for we can check for public comments. And then if there's anyone in the public here that wanted to have a public comment, that would work as well right now. Yeah. No phone calls. Okay. Any closing comments from committee members?
One, if anybody could sit in for me on the tree committee the first Tuesday, June 2nd. Sometimes they struggle to get a quorum, and I have work out of town scheduled. So if anyone see me after the meeting and I can.
What time is that?
It is at, I'll look it up. I think it's 3 o'clock, but I'll tell you for sure. I'll just look at my minutes here in a minute.
Sounds like you can go to that?
Yeah, I'm kind of excited
Okay.
about it.
Cool. We have a sub, but you can also tell us the timing. Okay, great. So if there's nothing else, we can adjourn.
You said it was from 2 or? Okay.
That was easy. I had a lot more questions for that guy, but nothing that, I mean, why take up the time? Oh my God, the idea of that. So, and I wanted to ask him what Tom did about the stuff that's in these trees, because I've got trees over the years that I've tried to get somebody to mill them, and if there's any chance of stuff in them, most guys won't take them. But that's been quite a while, and I know that they were making advances in detecting that will instantly stop the saw as soon as it detects it, even if they missed it, you know, doing the original scan. So that's cool. That's really good. And then the whole criminal justice aspect of it, I'm going to contact him about that. I'd like to know more about that.
Well, was it they're only planting 1,000 trees, or they're only planting 600 trees per 1,000?
Yeah. So when I was doing the community prosecution stuff, we were always looking for stuff like that, and that's why I want to know more about that. So.
Sorry. All right, 2 p.m.
All right. Cool. I want to listen in on this just because I have a future.
Right next to graphic packaging. And so as you, yeah, I mean, graphic packaging, and so as you come